Trump's first term. Ambassador, it's good to see you. I appreciate you being here. And let's jump right in on what Libby Dean was just talking about. Do you believe that Zelensky needs to be at that table? And does he need to get on board with ceding land? Is that the only path forward?
Well, let's flip this around. There's nothing that President Trump can agree with Vladimir Putin that is binding on Ukraine. Ukraine has to agree as well. So whether it's in this first meeting between Trump and Putin, they can have a conversation about what's possible. That's fine. But you're not going to reach any agreements there that mean anything until you bring Ukraine in, because it's Ukraine. It's their country. It's not our country. It's not President Trump's ability to decide about Ukraine. So you need to have them there in the end. But at this stage, I think it would be positive if Zelensky was included. But if not, it's not a crisis either. There will be more meetings after this.
What about the issue of ceding land? I mean, is there any path forward unless Zelensky and Ukraine can stomach that idea of giving up some land to the Kremlin?
Right. This is a very important point. And I think it's one that has been confused in the discussions over the past couple of days. Accepting the reality that Russia occupies 20% of Ukrainian territory and is not going to be dislodged militarily, that's one thing. That is an acceptance that Russia has an occupation, and you can choose not to contest that militarily. You can contest it through sanctions, through political means, through diplomacy, but we can live with that. That's what we did with East and West Germany. That's what we did with the Baltic states when they were occupied by the Soviet Union. That's one thing. Recognizing that territory as legitimately Russia's, that's a completely different thing and completely unwarranted, unjustified. This is a war of aggression, and appeasement to satisfy an aggressor like that will never produce peace.
Ambassador Volker, you listened to Russian President Vladimir Putin's demands, and he says that they want to annex land that they don't even occupy right now beyond the front lines. There was actually a survey that was recently conducted here in Ukraine, which found about 76% of the population here, so they claim, overwhelmingly rejects Russia's demands. So if President Trump is able to get Ukrainian President Zelensky on board, how does President Zelensky sell this at home?
Well, first off, President Trump, of all people, should not be surprised that Vladimir Putin is making absolutist, extremist demands. What's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. Because, from the art of the deal, you start with those high demands. But those demands can never be accepted by Ukrainians. Of course they can't. And what we need to do is keep enough pressure on Putin that he wants to actually cut a deal. He doesn't quite feel that yet. He doesn't feel any pressure, but he knew it was coming. That's why he ducked and weaved and got Trump to lift this deadline. But we still have to keep that pressure on. And then if we do that, there is a chance of getting a ceasefire. And that's the key part here. Stop the killing, stop the fighting. Then we can have a conversation about, are there territorial swaps? Mutual ones? What does Russia give up? What does Ukraine give up? So far, everything we've heard from Vladimir Putin is all one-sided. He keeps what he already has and he gets more.
You listen to the concerns that Ukrainians have on the ground here. Their biggest fear is that this is all smoke and mirrors, and that if a ceasefire deal is struck, Russia will simply regroup, go back to war, try and take more territory. So if there's an agreement, someone's going to have to enforce it. Yeah. Is there any scenario in which the United States gets dragged into that and that you would see U.S. troops here in order to enforce any agreements?
Well, first off, let's be clear. The Ukrainians are absolutely right because we've been through this before. The Russians attacked in 2014. There was a ceasefire. They routinely violated that ceasefire on a weekly basis. And then they massively violated that ceasefire in February 22. So we know that the Ukrainians are right. That's exactly what Russia will do. So the key is, if you get a ceasefire, to then put enough capability in place to deter future Russian attacks. Now, there are talks about how to do that. The Europeans have talked about a reassurance force that would deploy. We can talk about air defense and assisting Ukraine with its air defenses, including NATO helping with that. The U.S. doesn't need to have any ground troops. We don't need to be involved in any fighting. But the U.S. role is critical when it comes to helping integrate the systems that Ukraine has with those of NATO, making sure the ammunition and the equipment is flowing to Ukraine so that Putin can see that there's a credible deterrent. That's what the U.S. role should be, not to fight, but to make sure the deterrent is in place.
And we appreciate that context. Former ambassador to NATO and special representative to Ukraine during President Trump's first term, Ambassador Kurt Volker, it was good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.